Today we're gonna compare the Samsung Galaxy S20 versus the Huawei P30, the regular P30 and not the Pro, and both of these do offer triple camera setup on the back, as well as they both can zoom up to 30x. So this comparison is more gonna be like a 1-to-1 ratio. So this is the quick low light test of the front facing camera, and even though I'm in the city, I'm in between trees right now, so it's kind of dark, but they do have little light lamps on top. So let's move on to the next section. So for portrait mode, the experience on both phones are a little bit different. On the P30, you can just point shoot and it just works. On the Samsung, you would have to move around a little bit to get it to register, but so far in my experience, it's really quick. Both phones give you the option to zoom in, but the P30 does give you an extra step. For me, knowing more about photography and video, I do like how the Huawei P30 gives you an actual f-stop counter to choose how much background blur you want. Samsung does make it easier for the regular people out there, which only shows a bar that ranges from 1 to 7. So moving on to the pictures, I noticed that the Samsung does have a hard time trying to figure out or find a cutout for reflective objects. I do like how the colors on the Samsung is really consistent throughout the whole time when you're shooting on the wide or telephoto lens. On a P30, as I'm zooming in, I do notice some pictures to be a bit too green, a bit too yellow, and sometimes it just looks really contrasty. So that is my biggest con on the P30, is that the color is really inconsistent. Now for the front-facing camera, I would say hands down the S20 is the winner here. Clearly the HDR is better, you can actually see the textures of the clouds even though it's blurred out. On the Huawei P30, it's just a really big, overexposed white canvas. I do like the skin tones much better, it doesn't feel as flat as the P30, and I think looking at my black jacket, it's really close to being black. On the P30, it feels like I'm bringing up the shadows, so the whole black kind of looks a bit white. For everyday situations, they're both equal since they have 3 cameras on the back. If you love the super ultra wide look, then the Samsung does have the wider ultra wide lens. Like I said before, they both can go up to 30x, but I'm not really counting which one is better at that point. For me, I just find it more useful to see things from far away rather than using it to actually take pictures. For HDR, they seem like they're pretty equal. Sometimes the P30 looks better and sometimes the S20 looks better. I'm just gonna leave that up to you to make that judgment. For the colors, I do notice that the S20 is a bit more saturated on certain levels. So I noticed the blue sky is really blue most of the time on the Samsung S20. But realistically from the eyes, it's not that blue. The blue is closer to what the Huawei P30 is seeing. And it was a pretty cloudy day, and looking at the clouds, the white actually looks white on the P30, and of course it looks a bit more blue on the S20. But some people may like that look since the pictures do pop out a bit more, so I think that it's more ready for social media sharing. Since I'm taking a lot of pictures throughout this day, I do like how the Samsung zoom in button is right at the middle of the UI, which makes it so much easier and faster to zoom in. On the Huawei, if I'm holding it with my left hand, I would have to reach across the screen just to zoom in. So the user experience is a bit better on the Samsung since I can comfortably zoom in and out on both hands. In low light situations, I would say the Samsung is still more consistent with the colors. From my experience, Huawei P30 does have a tendency to show a bit more green in their images, so I'm not too surprised there. For the performance of the S20, once I hit the shutter button during nighttime, especially if it's a really dark picture, I can feel it buffering and it takes a second to take that picture. Also, the focusing is pretty slow as well. I can see it go in and out a lot, and sometimes I just press the shutter button and it takes that picture when it's out of focus. Usually that happens to me a lot when I'm using the telephoto lens. For the ultra wide angle lens, not so much, and barely on the main wide lens. During nighttime, I would say the HDR is better on the Samsung S20 since I can see much more better in the darker spots. Now moving on to night mode, I feel like I can see a bigger difference in terms of brightness on the S20. For the colors, Samsung is clearly the winner. Everything looks really green on the P30. And sometimes the night mode on the P30 makes the images look even more green. But for the performance, the S20 is still a bit sluggish here. With all the other phones I've used, once I switch to night mode, I can just press the shutter button and it works. On the S20, I would have to wait a little bit until I see the second counter on the lower right, and then once it's done taking a picture, I would have to wait until it's done processing, and then I can see the full night mode picture. Moving on to video, the stabilization is better on the Samsung. Everything looks slightly more smoother as I'm walking. The colors also look much better on the Samsung as well. On the P30, it looks like it has this light green and yellow hue to it, and the whole image seems to be darker. Now I'm not hitting anything on the screen or locking any settings. I'm just legitimately hitting the record button and start walking, so these settings are on automatic. They both can also shoot in ultra wide, and stabilization of course is better on the Samsung. For the colors, I do know that the Samsung is always more saturated, but looking at that red building on the Huawei P30, I feel like that's too oversaturated for me. So for this round, it does feel like the Samsung looks more natural. Zooming into 3x, the Samsung is still smoother. On the P30, everything seems to be jerky and it looks like it's trying to catch up with the stabilization. The Samsung can also shoot in 4K 60, which the Huawei P30 can't. For some reason, the stabilization in 4K 60 doesn't seem to do too well, but the colors are still way better than the Huawei P30. Keep in mind that if you're shooting 4K 60 on a Samsung, you can only use the main wide camera lens. You can't really use the other two lenses. The S20 can also shoot in 8K, and it does punch in a lot, but looking at these two side by side, it seems really close to the same focal length as the P30. Now, one of the biggest downsides of the 8K is when I start panning around quickly, you can see that the image is getting pretty choppy, but the colors are still consistent and it still looks better than the P30. Now moving on to low light, it's something I would avoid since you can see a lot of noise, and this is where you can see more green coming out from the P30. For stabilization, it's still better on the S20 and you can see a lot of micro jitters on the P30. So if you're planning to do a lot of video, then the Samsung seems to be the better choice. And trying out the 3x zoom again, there's really no competition, the Samsung is clearly the winner. For 4K 60, the stabilization or micro jitters still seems to be better on the Samsung. Now for the colors, the Samsung seems to have more of that greenish yellow hue to it, but realistically, both of these phones do not represent what the eyes can see. On the Huawei, the white balance is pretty aggressive, so it's taking out a lot of that tungsten look to it. For my eyes, I'm seeing more yellow than what the Huawei is seeing, and less yellow from what the Samsung is seeing. Now for 8K, it's not doing too well in low light. There's a lot of noise, especially in the darker spots. I would avoid shooting 8K in low light in all situations. And of course, it does get even worse if I'm panning around really quickly. This is something I just want to try out and see how it looks like. So that is my comparison between these two phones. I think the biggest point for me is the great consistency of color on the Samsung S20. The Huawei P30 still takes great pictures, it has a lot of modes as well. I think the biggest downside is the greenish tone to it, especially during nighttime. So let me know what you guys think about these two phones. If you are interested in any of these phones, I do have the links down below. Please follow me on Instagram, give a like, subscribe if you want to see more S20 content, hit the bell, and thanks for watching.